Okay, great. So like I was saying, this is hosted by Manderley Collective, which is a group started by NYU creative writing students, including myself, Hannah Matheson, and Marissa Davis, as we entered into, well, really, it sort of launched as we started to enter into that, the isolation of the quarantine brought on by the pandemic last semester. So last semester, we started a weekly series of readings, interviews, conversations, with writers and artists that we admire from all over. And as a collective, our mission is really to just sort of use art as best as possible as a force against that isolation. You know, certainly in these times when physical isolation is really an immediate and difficult reality, but then also against structural and sort of socio-political isolation more broadly. So while writing, you know, is often seen as an individual endeavor, we really want to recognize it as also an important means of stimulating community, conversation, and collaboration. And so we're so excited to be starting up again after a little summer break with this reading and conversation with Vievee Francis and Matthew Olzmann. We're so excited to have you. So I'm about to turn it over to Hannah to introduce our guests, but I just want to add quickly that after the reading, Hannah and Marissa and I will have a few follow-up questions, and then we will hopefully have time for 1 or 2 questions from you all, from other folks in the audience. So if you have a question throughout, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get to at least a few of those at the very end. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Hannah to introduce our guests.
Hi, we could not be more thrilled that everyone is here. There are so many friendly faces in the audience. And I will stick to official bios, but I know from personal experience that Vievee Francis and Matt Olzmann are so beloved as artists, but also as peers and friends and educators. So we feel just massively grateful and lucky to have them here. Vievee Francis is the author of 3 books of poetry: Bluetail Fly from Wayne State University Press, 2006, Horse in the Dark, which won the Cave Canem Northwestern University Poetry Prize for a second collection in 2016, and Forest Primeval, which was the winner of the Hurston Wright Legacy Award and the 2017 Kingsley-Tufts Poetry Award. Her work has appeared in numerous print and online journals, textbooks, and anthologies, including Poetry, Best American Poetry, and Angles of Ascent, a Norton anthology of contemporary African-American poetry. She has been a participant in the Cave Canem Workshops, a poet in residence for the Alice Lloyd Scholars Program at the University of Michigan, and teaches poetry writing in the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop. In 2009, she received a Rona Jaffe Writers Award, and in 2010, a Kresge Fellowship. She serves as an associate editor of Callaloo and an associate professor of English and creative writing at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. So I'll turn it over to Vievee now.
Thank you, Hannah. It's really marvelous, you all having us. I appreciate it so much. And the first poem is entitled The Shore. In a nondescript hotel in South Texas, I thought I had fallen in love with a couple. There, in the dim hallway with rugs that were clean enough but darkly patterned to hide the stains, so who knows. Her back was against the wall, her arms up and around his neck. He was bent down to kiss her, to press his body into hers. Their bodies were fluid, 2 waves not crashing but moving through each other. I watched them from the other end of the hallway. Surprised to see them, I halted. Doesn't another person's passion make us want? They never saw me. I didn't stay long and stayed silent. She was not his wife, but his love was palpable. His hands were tender, not quick, slow, not furtive. That press. I have been witness to such passion more than once and more than most. On a common street in Manhattan, in a nondescript restaurant whose patrons, too young to value discretion or quiet, spoke in loud voices and fell drunkenly over the tables. I saw a friend through the oversized windows, the street lit by random lights. He drew her up into his body. She was no friend of mine. She followed me to follow him. She found him and drew his face down to hers. They kissed in a way that said they had kissed many times before, and perhaps it had been a long time. The kiss was long and deep. I ate my steak au poivre bloody under sauce and waited for them to finish, for him to come back to the table after rushing out to take a call. They never saw me watching, didn't even look up. He swept her up as if his entire body longed for a certain kind of completion. Her hair so like his mother's he might have cried into it. Where is the shame in that? She was not his wife. I am not his judge. I was on the shore, only a witness to the oceanic, dangerous, tidal, and always. Another attempt at the telling. It opens with an epigraph by Roberto Bolaño. The secret story is the one we'll never know, although we're living it from day to day. But we do know, at least we each know our own secret story, and when we grow brave enough, might share it. And if the party we share it with is honest, they might admit their own. And from there, hands held, we walk into the grotto and dip our hands into the cold waters, or meander up a darkened stairwell into the dust of a store of books, or descend into a speakeasy behind a roped curtain easily untied. The secret to knowing the secret is to speak, but we too often tell the stories of no matter and avoid the one story that does matter. We are bound by that secret story, so you think by now we'd tell it, at least to each other. When your brother dies, you want. When your brother dies, you want nothing more than to be held by your brother, and within that absence, to be held by another. It will take that to cry it through. And if there is no one to do so, if there is an embrace, but it doesn't last long enough, you may never feel the joy of wailing. Instead, you may hold that cry for years, until no one knew you ever needed to cry at all, until you believe you are free of tears, until one day, standing at the sink, the water running hot over a cloth, you double over, and that cry escapes in a gasp. A memory of the body in convulsion, the sick bed, the smell of death so close you forget there are people in the room, and you almost let go before someone reminds you that day is done and done. And you straighten up and continue to do whatever you were doing, close the valve of that ache, swallow whatever came up. Honey. Every spring, there was always a boy or two who dared to press himself into the bees. In the South, where the free hives hang close to the bark from limb to ground, taller than the tall boys who would walk toward the mass slowly, quietly, one arm held out and a hand as delicate in the air as a cotton fan. On a small college campus full of the brilliant, the mundane, and the mad, the boys, inevitably slender, but sometimes muscled, would let the bees cover their shirtless bodies, their hair, their delicious skin. The loners, the eccentric, boys with their own voices in their heads, but I'd like to think it was music they heard, the song of bees, their dislocated thrum, most know to dread. I would watch from the distance and admire their willingness to inhabit what others wouldn't consider. A few years back, alone, miles from any home I'd known, I walked along an avenue where great bundles of flowers were hung just above my head. I stopped. There were few bees, but enough. I thrust my arms up to the elbows into those blooms. I have been allergic all of my life, always carrying an antidote, always afraid. But I wanted to know what I had to lose. No bees stung me, but I fell breathless on the grass and thought of those boys, so beautifully drawn, such reckless hosts. I've worn it 3 days in a row. the dress my mother died in. No, the dress I was wearing when my mother died. And I took pictures of myself. Self, no, of the dress, of my legs curled tight under the dress, only my ankles and feet showing. I held my arm up and back and did not want my head, my swollen eyes and chapped lips, and all of that dried salt on my face. My face she couldn't bear to look at unless it was with disgust. My hair, never good, no good, and my unironed dress, this one, the one I'm wearing now, with its white cotton underslip and its red embroidered paisley on a white background. It is beautiful, even with me in it. Yes, I am not wearing a hat. She said, you look so ugly in that damn hat. It was my favorite one of 3 hats. She had over 100 hats stored in her basement in labeled hat boxes. They were her particular thing. Every Sunday, a new one on, perched proudly as a bird of paradise, though only the males are so presentable. But she was once a tomboy, and so was her mother. She hated my teacups and my dollies that I couldn't sleep without, like I slept that day when I found out she had died. I lay fetal upon the bed atop the duvet and wanted to live and felt guilt like a razor over the wrist. You always were odd, always carrying on. You talk too much. You were a mess, and I was a mess. My chest wet and my heart shrinking in, and I was shrinking, and this was good. She was always a small woman, except for a few years when she grew past what her small frame could hold. Who can say why her hunger grew and why she hated my hunger to be held and so recoiled? And I went days and days without any touch at all, and I have gone days and days since, ugly in my hat. Even my father thought so sometimes, though now he isn't sure. Since she died, so much has changed. Even this dress, now stained by wear and coffee and crying, and now the pills won't let me, and now and again sleeping in it, and just last night keeping it on for dinner alone, where I found out she had died a few minutes after our last phone call, when she couldn't see me and so could afford to love me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that gorgeous reading. It's hard to talk. Next, we have Matthew Olzmann, who is the author of 2 collections of poems, Mezzanines, which was selected for the 2011 Kundimon Prize, and Contradictions in the Design. His next book, Constellation Route, is forthcoming from Alice James Books in January 2022 and is highly anticipated. His writing has appeared in Best American Poetry, Kenyon Review, New England Review, Brevity, and elsewhere. He teaches at Dartmouth College and in the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College.
Hi. So it's kind of strange looking around and seeing like people from all these different eras of my life here, like friends, siblings. My 1-year-old niece I saw in one of these little windows. Students, poets I've admired for a while. Parts of my fantasy football and fantasy basketball leagues. And so before we go any further, I want to publicly acknowledge that I love every person here. I mean it. We've traveled from all over to be here, and I love each of you, all of you, every last one of you except Harold. But the rest of you, I love fervently and without limitation. It's important that you believe this is a boundless love, rhapsodic, without timidity or hesitation, because everyone is deserving of compassion, absolutely everyone. Just not Harold. But for the rest of you, this affection is perfect, unconditional, and free. Not unconditional with air quotes around it. Not unconditional like a gatekeeper in the garden saying, look at the fruit, but do not shovel it into thy weird little face. Saying, love me and none other. Saying, the firstborn, the locust, the welt of grief I've pressed upon your back. It is a truly unstoppable wave of tenderness that doesn't traffic in punishment or retribution. In ethically challenged times, it's important to have a stringent moral code code, steadfast as the oak whose taproot plunges into the earth, deep enough to allow the tree to never waver, never sway, never give in to the winds of convenience and malice. And therefore, this faultless love never marches into the frostbitten fields or down the streets of its numerous enemies to shout something like, "Oh, motherfuckers, I'm petty and malevolent," and will track you through the sleet to show you all the ways in which your world will fracture and die. This love would never even think to say something like that. Instead, it reaches with a gentle hand, a heart full of benignities, and an unflinching recognition that, without question, there is no living soul unworthy of forgiveness except Harold and now Marcus and possibly Mackenzie, but really no one else beyond redemption. It is a love from which there are no omissions, no exclusions, no rules or fine print on this contract, which is binding. I saw someone wrote, why are Vievee and Matt on different computers? Good question. Mostly because we're in different rooms, so we don't have like a feedback loop from our computers. This poem is probably the newest thing I'm going to read, and it's called, "In 1 minute, Scott Cunningham will read a poem about faces of death." But first he explains to the audience what Faces of Death was. A documentary with actual footage of actual people making real and horrible exits from their lives. Executions, accidents, ripped asunder by alligators, and if you were a child in the 80s, which I was, you believed it was real, which I did, even though it was mostly fake, which I did not know or even suspect until this very blindsided moment. Thank you, Scott. By now, Scott is midway through his poem, and I'm sure it's a stunner, but I'm suddenly preoccupied, wondering what other Ponzi schemes I might have poured some part of my dewy-eyed childhood faith into. How did I not recognize this thing that terrified me, this thing that would materialize after dark in a friend's basement with a whispered, "Don't tell your parents," was all just a callow ruse? I thought by now I'd have untangled at least one thread of truth from the Byzantine fictions of American boyhood, the Tooth Fairy, Superman, Ronald Reagan, myths upon which one might fashion a life which I'm now in the middle of, feeling less than triumphant as I look backward across the mirage, as if decades could be flattened into something like a suburban baseball field, where at the other end, a child-size version of me, cap on his head, sun in his eyes, steps to the plate, ready for the fastball, anticipating the fastball, seeing the fastball, which is actually a curve as it leaves the pitcher's hand. He digs in, takes a hurricane swing, and misses. That kid is owed promptly a refund. And the modern version of me, I owe Scott an apology for spacing out in the middle of his poem, which he read quite beautifully last week at the Stockbridge Library. Regarding the recent scar on my jawline, they ask what happened. I say, wolf rendezvous. They say, no, really, tell us. I say, Renaissance Festival jousting anomaly. They say, we don't believe you. I say, cleaver juggling is not as easy as it looks. Do-it-yourself surgery to avoid facial recognition technology is not as easy as it looks. Shark dentistry is not as easy as it looks or even a thing. But what if it were? I say this is where my wife installed the tracking chip. I say this is where the alien implant was implanted. They say, well then. They say, you don't have to be so evasive. I say, I'm not being evasive. If I were evasive, I would have evaded the salient point of the javelin, the throwing star, the greased blade of inevitability, the scythe swinging continuously through shafts of rye. Defeated, I say it was a near miss, which isn't accurate, isn't precise in the telling, but isn't entirely a lie. A near miss is somewhat true, the way metaphor is somewhat true. There's always some kind of near miss. Haven't all of us almost been cut much deeper? The patch of ice on the sidewalk, the smoke detector beeping in the kitchen, the tumor discovered while there is still time. We hold our loved ones tight. We understand how fragile, how precarious, how lucky is the foundation on which the future rests. Like a whisper beneath your ear, a fingertip brushing your chin, the ineffable finds a way to shake you from the dark. Doesn't it always let you know how close it came? doesn't it always leave its slender mark? It's always kind of a challenge to read with Vievee, because before the reading, she will tell me that she'll tell me, all your best poems are about me. You should read some of those. And then after the reading, she will say, stop reading poems about me. Everyone's looking at me and it's embarrassing. So it's hard to kind of find a balance there. So I'm going to read one poem. It's kind of an older poem. It's called Mountain Dew Commercial Disguised as a Love Poem. Here's what I've got. The reasons why our marriage might work: because you wear pink but write poems about bullets and gravestones, because you yell at your keys when you lose them and laugh loudly at your own jokes, because you memorize songs, even commercials from 30 years back, and sing them when vacuuming. You have soft hands, because when we moved, the contents of what you packed were written inside the boxes, because you think swans are overrated, because you drove me to the train station, you drove me to Minneapolis, you drove me to Providence, because you underline everything you read and circle the things you think are important and put stars next to the things you think I should think are important and write notes in the margins about all the people you're mad at, and my name almost never appears there, because you make that pork recipe you found in the Frida Kahlo cookbook, because when you read that essay on Rilke, you underlined the whole thing except the part where Rilke says love means to deny the self and be consumed in flames. Because when the lights are off, the curtains drawn, and an additional sheet is nailed over the windows, you still believe someone outside can somehow see you. And one day, 5 summers ago, when you couldn't put gas in your car, when your fridge was so empty, not even leftovers or condiments, there's a single 20-ounce bottle of Mountain Dew, which you paid for with your last damn dime, because you once overheard me say that I liked it. My invisible horse and the speed of human decency. People always tell me don't put the cart before the horse, which is curious because I don't have a horse. Is this some new advancement in public shaming, repeatedly drawing one's attention to that which one is currently not and never has been in possession of? If ever I happen to obtain a Clydesdale, then I'll align absolutely it to its proper position in relation to the cart. But I can't do that because all I have is the cart, one solitary cart, a little grief wagon that goes precisely nowhere, along with apparently one invisible horse which does not pull, does not haul, does not in any fashion budge, impel, or tow my disaster buggy up the hill or down the road. I'm not asking for much. A more tender world with less hatred strutting through the streets, perhaps a downtick in state-sanctioned violence against civilians, wind through the trees, water under the bridge, kindness. LOL, says the world. These things take time, says the Office of Disappointment. Change cannot be rushed, says the round table of my smartest friends. And together they say the cart, they say the horse, they say, haven't we told you this already? And so my invisible horse remains standing where it previously stood, between hot dog stands and hallelujahs, between the NASDAQ and the moon's adumbral visage, between the status quo and the great filter. And I can see that it's not his fault, being invisible and not existing, how my horse is the product of both my imagination and the greater good's failure of imagination. Watch how I press my hand against his translucent flank, how I hold 2 sugar cubes to his hypothetical mouth, how I say I want to believe in him, speaking softly into his missing ear. And I'll read one more. Like a dish rag soaked in bleach, this new pandemic or the next or maybe some unknown future contagion might comprehensively scrub any of us from the earth, the way the waitress comprehensively wipes down the diner's counter 2 seats from me, sprays the surface with Lysol, then wipes everything again spotless. It's late February. In a month, this place will be closed. And a month later, it will no longer exist. But right now, the experts say, wash your hands, all will be fine. So if you should, coughing just once into the concern of your elbow, sit near me at this counter, then look up to say what's good. I'll say, the coffee is so good, and also the cheeseburger, and you must try the vanilla milkshake. The onion rings, excellent. The jalapeno poppers, exquisite. And here's the sports page, which says a guy just broke the world pole vaulting record, and that is also good. I don't want to ignore peril. I'm not trying to distract from the threat of plague, debt, unemployment, fate like a meteor whistling toward us. I'm just saying it's good to have lived, even briefly, in a time when one's vocation, one's destiny could be the use of a pole, to vault over a different pole, which for me seems bizarre, though less bizarre than other sports, such as bog snorkeling, cheese rolling, or eel pulling, which was basically tug of war with a live eel and popular in the Netherlands in the 1800s. Any action can become a contest. Any contest is one will try to win. The burger I recommended, the world record for competitive burger eating is 32 in 10 minutes flat. Man versus virus is another competition. The odds might not be in our team's favor. I don't know how much time you or I have left or if the final buzzer is about to buzz, but I love being here on this strange planet. I love so much sitting here, eating lunch and contemplating while I still can this specific strangeness, love paying the bill before returning to that strangeness, and how each time when heading for the door, always, if I turn around before exiting, always, if I look to the place where I once was, I see already the rag has rubbed the surface clean. The counter sparkles as if I were never there. Nothing left but shine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vievee and Matthew, for two just wonderfully beautiful, beautiful readings. We are going to go into asking you guys a couple of questions, if that's okay. I'll be asking the first one, and then after Rachel and Hannah's, I'll be kind of picking / curating ones that the audience ask as well. So my first question, let me find it. So looking at kind of the broader arc of your work, and both of your writing, the human relationship to the natural world seems to be a pretty kind of paramount concern. And so could you both talk a bit about the various ways in which nature infuses and influences your writing?
Do you wanna start, Matthew?
You can start.
Okay.
I think your answers to this, your answer is probably more interesting than my answer.
Well, I can speak for both of us, saying we're both creatures of an urban environment. I didn't really know how urban I had become until we moved to the mountains of Western North Carolina. And that's when I really began to have a relationship, a deeper relationship with nature. But I lived on a farm in the piney woods of East Texas briefly as a child and kept going back there for the summers. So I did have some kind of bridge for dealing with those mountains, but it wasn't a strong enough one. So I have a very fraught relationship with the wilderness. And I've stated before that, that the US is not the UK. The UK is, there's more tamed landscape. In the US, what we're calling tamed is not tamed. Everywhere I go, there's something that can bite me or, or wreak some havoc upon me. So I can't live without nature now. I don't want my trees limited to the balconies of lofts in New York anymore. However, I still feel wariness inside of the forest. So I'm constantly in a battle with it, and I'm highly allergic to bees, and I mean highly allergic, and they're everywhere. So, and I also see man as, I think about the nature of man more than I think about most other things. And unfortunately, I don't think of the nature of man as something benevolent. So.
I tend to think about, I guess in relation to writing, I think about my relationship with nature is pretty inconsistent and generally is determined by whatever is going to make a more interesting metaphor in a poem. It feels like on one day it's one thing, on another day it's a different thing. Sometimes it's it's some days, like out here in New Hampshire, some days I look at the mountains and I see like just like the sugar maples turning bright red in the autumn, and I'm like, wow, what a place of stunning beauty. And other times I just see like battalions of like deer ticks, crawling toward me. So it's not necessarily a very static relationship. It seems to be sort of my perception is constantly shifting back and forth on it.
There is a constant for you, though. I'm gonna tell your friends your secrets now. Yeah, because you're a big lake boy. I mean, typical of people from Michigan or anywhere around the big lakes. You have never seen. You don't feel that way about the ocean. You look at the ocean and I can see the inconsistency, but I have never seen you look at a lake, one of the big lakes, without being drawn like literally into it. Like you love the lakes and you could look at them for hours.
True.
I also didn't know you were going to read a poem about me. Okay, just saying. We didn't tell each other what we were going to read before. We kind of kept that under wraps. And for David Martinez, we are in different rooms. Did Matt say that? Yes. Okay. In the same house. Okay.
So I think I'll follow up with a question about, well, so, as artists who educate, you're both sort of known as writers who are interested and invested in communities and cultivating communities. What does writing in community mean to you, or how do you think about that or engage with that, especially now that our communities have been affected, and are less physically intimate than they would be not in a pandemic, I suppose.
Matt, I'm giving this one to you first.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about the relationship between writing and community because writing is such a solitary practice. I mean, most of your writing life is like you at a desk, looking at a screen or a notebook or reading or crossing things out, balling up paper and pressing delete and rewriting things. And it's kind of a really isolating experience on its own. And in that way, it's but then like the other part of writing is that you're always writing something with the idea of how these words are going to create an experience for another person or a group of people. So it's sort of like this paradoxical balancing act where on one hand you're completely alone, and on the other hand the thing you're making is for someone else and for a group, or a larger group or one person, and trying to kind of constantly move between those two things. So like right now I think the job of writing, in some ways, feels, I think it's more anxiety producing just because there's so much anxiety in the world, but the actual act of writing feels like, still feels somewhat similar in that, it's just you and your computer or you and a notebook.
I think about community in a lot of different ways, and I completely agree. I think writing is more anxiety riddled right now. But as far as communities go, I remember talking to several people when I was younger, trying to convince people that community was more than just a physical site, that it was more than, say, a city or a group of neighborhoods alone, that if you leave that site, you're still carrying it with you. So as we connect through online means, I still feel very connected to several communities. But I always saw a community as existing here in a particular landscape, and also being taken out and being expansive and mutable. And so even though, for example, I can't really see all of the participants in this particular reading, I still feel drawn to various communities that are here and part of it. But I'm like a rabbit. I need constant physical interaction. You know how if you go to a pet store, they're all bundled together. Well, that's what I need constantly. And yet, I still feel deeply connected to several communities. And I think it's important. The other thing I think that's important is gatekeeping. Not that gatekeeping is important, that breaking down the gates becomes important. And various communities, strong and various communities that keep extraordinary and overwhelming gatekeeping from happening, and communication between those communities, that becomes important.
Okay, our last question. Also, I just wanted to echo everyone in the chat who's been saying thank you for these poems at this time. It's been very life affirming, and obviously I'm such a huge fan. I've been excited for weeks, but it also feels like getting in the car and having your favorite song come on the radio. Coincidentally, I didn't know what you both would read, and hearing so many of my favorites has just been a huge gift today. And also I wanted to welcome guests to ask questions in the chat, and then that will give Marissa an opportunity to look through them and maybe combine a few in our last 15 minutes if you want to ask Matthew and Vievee something specific. Our last question is kind of a follow-up, and Vievee hit this kind of on the head with the question of gatekeeping and how our communities are structured. I've been to readings recently where authors are asked to answer a question about how the pandemic and the many civil injustices it has exacerbated have interrupted or intensified one's reading and writing habits. I think it's very hard not to be inundated by a feeling of anxiety right now. And we also have more solitary time on our hands. And it occurred to me that this question is really interesting, but assumes a preceding set pattern or normalcy in writing. So my question is, what did your reading and creative process depend on before? And does this moment that asks us to interrogate the concept of normalcy itself provide the possibility of a positive disruption in the literary space?
Matt, I'd like to start if you don't mind. My process before was intense observation, observing the world around me, paying attention to the world around me, but also paying attention to my interior landscape. And because I don't believe I exist in a vacuum, if I write something about what's happening inside, I don't feel like I'm writing just for myself. Someone else may absolutely relate to what I'm saying, but it is a very solitary process, as Matt was talking about earlier. The things recently have seriously disrupted my writing, but in the best way, because some of the things that are happening needed to happen and have shocked me. And I didn't think I could start crying. I didn't think I'd live to see some of the things I have lived to see. So even though I need to take time to process it, I'm still going to write the way I write. I'm still going to press myself to look within and without. I'm not going to suddenly move from a polemical writer to what we might consider a political writer. But isn't it all political? You know, I'm a keener, and there's a place for keening. someone has to cry for those of us who fall. Someone has to cry for those of us who get back up. And that's how I see myself in my role. So there is disruption and anxiety, but I definitely see it as necessary. And the pandemic is forcing so many writers to write in a kind of stillness, particularly younger writers they may not have written in before. It is altering, but for me, it's been positively altering.
Yeah, I was going to say with can this moment provide the possibility of a positive disruption in literary arts for that part of the question? I mean, I think so, but I think but I don't necessarily know if I would attribute it specifically to this moment. I think it depends on people who, on individual people or groups of people who, and how they choose to respond. Like it's like, because the moment itself that we feel like we're moving through, I don't necessarily think it's inevitable that it'll create any type of positive change in any sphere, because it does on you know, in some ways you're seeing like the best of people come out, but in others you're also seeing it's capable of bringing out the worst in people as well. So I think it's still it's to be decided whether the resulting changes lean more towards positive or negative, but I can see ways it can go in either direction. That's
really true. And so the challenge is, which way are we going to take it? How are we going to use it? But you bring up something important, Matthew, because I think we have seen the worst. And for some who feel that we are inside a disaster and everything's falling apart and I can't do anything, for some people it shuts them down, but I'm hoping there'll be a different response from most.
Thank you. Thank you both for your really insightful, wonderful answers to the questions. We're going to go ahead and ask a few audience questions now. I'm kind of scrolling through and seeing what people have been posting along the way. So one of the earlier ones that I saw is speaking to the experience of being a couple as writers. Do you find that you all influence one another's craft?
Do I influence your craft, Matthew?
We did get a Vievee poem, so.
Oh. I don't know. Vievee's always my first reader, and so in some ways I'm kind of writing with even when I'm not writing poems about her or to her or something, I'm kind of writing with her as an audience in mind, you know, before other audiences, because I know she's reading, so that she's going to be reading this verse. And I think that sort of influences the writing, like the kind of direction it's going to go. There's but I think there's like a lot of I think there's a lot of ways, you know, that that it might not be entirely different from any other functioning relationship, and you know, you have a partner that sort of understands what you're trying to do, and is supporting that goal and trying to push you towards it. So and I realize not everyone or every relationship is like that, but that might be the sort of broader impact, I think, you know, is having this place where what you're trying to do is understood and supported, and you've got like a partner who's helping you move toward that.
Yeah, partnership is the better word, because when I think of, when I think of husbands and wives and their writing, sometimes I think of kind of competitiveness or swallowing, particularly if you know, the male is much farther ahead than the woman, that, you know, if it's in a kind of heteronormative situation. And so yeah, I don't like thinking about that. I think partnership is much more the operative word for Matthew and I. And we, in our years together, because we've known each other, you know, decades now, I think we just bounce off of each other. I see Matthew's work is very expansive like this, and my work tends to go inward like this. So I think we affect each other's craft by balancing each other's tendencies. Yeah, and we don't read each other every poem we write, but we talk about poetry 24/7. We are very boring.
I guess on a more literal level, how does like part of the question was, how does it influence each other's craft and content? Like in terms of content, I have like a zillion quotes from Vievee that I want to use as like epigraphs. I want to do like just like a whole book.
Yeah, you epigraph me.
And I also I've also been like forever suggesting that I wanted to start a podcast called This Is What Vievee Really Thinks, where I just like record like these little rants that she'll go on throughout the day on like.
I don't go on rants. It doesn't happen.
And so sometimes it'll be like a couple minutes long, but sometimes might be like an hour long, where it'll just be her going. And she is not. I have yet to convince her that this is a good idea, but those that might be on a more literal level, thinking about how she might influence content.
You don't need to thank whatever being you worship or universe that I am not on social media. You really don't want to see Vievee Twitter, Vievee Facebook. Nobody wants that. Okay.
I think we want that podcast though. I think we do. So we have another question. So to Vievee specifically, it seems. So I think it's one that could very much work with the both of you. I was hoping to ask about how you enter books. Your opening poems and opening lines feel like an invitation often to wrestle with some immediate discomfort or grief or monumental emotion. How do you figure out the puzzle of entry?
I often begin my poems with a question that I'm asking myself, or something that's happened that I want to share. And I think there is a good deal of immediacy, like, or something that I noticed. For example, I noticed that I was wearing the dress that I was wearing when my mother died, day after day after day. And I didn't even realize I was doing it until one evening I was sleeping in it. And I think I said aloud, perhaps I think I said to you, Matthew, or I may have said it to myself, I've worn this dress 3 days in a row. And that's the moment, there are realizations, I get small realizations, and that's where my poems begin generally. And again, I'm hoping that even though I'm talking about my own personal grief, I'm hoping that someone else will know what that means, to be devastated and to find yourself in a habit or doing something in response to that devastation. And then other times I'll see something, like I saw a friend he gasped, he was about to cry, and then he had to not cry because he was inside of the household and the grief was older. And that led to when your brother dies, you want, because I thought about all the moments I wanted to cry and was unable to. So it's small realizations. That's my answer.
Okay, and there's one more. I think we'll probably make this our last question. This one goes out to the both of you. What are you reading right now?
Oh, Matt, you start. You're the bibliophile.
But we just moved into a new house, and a lot of our books are in boxes. So, I've been kind of like, as we've been unpacking them, I've been rediscovering things that I might have read a while ago, or just like, I'm not very good at unpacking books, which is what because like I will get like a few books in and then I'll just be reading, so it takes a long time. But I was reading Campbell McGrath's Nouns and Verbs most recently. That's the book that's on my desk at the moment.
Well, right now I have a couple of books here. I tend to read several books at one time and then I go through them. So I have some books on the way that I'm looking forward to. Brother Dwayne Betts soon. And right now on my table, I have Cleopatra Mathis's new book. After the Body. I'm going to do a commercial for Cleopatra. So the new poems deal with illness, and I had surgery recently that really knocked me down. And these poems are just salvation. What else have I got here? Peter Orner, rereading Maggie Brown. I'm just like a commercial for my friends. I never ask me what I'm reading. And I'm looking at my friend Sebastian Matthews' new book, A Memoir and Essays, Beyond Repair. Put that here. And there are 5 boxes of books over here. And for those who put it in the chat, they are not labeled on the inside. They are labeled on the outside. Where we used to live, you had to label it on the inside or people would steal your boxes. If they know TV, they're gonna take the TV. Now we're living in the upper valley of Vermont, and I'm assuming from the people I see around, our neighbors are always looking. So nobody gets away with anything here. But yeah, so poetry books are marked on the outside. I still want to talk about all the books. I could just crack them open. So, yeah. And then from about, I guess, 40 people who are participating in this reading, like I bought all of their books right before I got ill, and just now starting to open them up.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Thank you, Vievee. Thank you, Matthew, for your generosity, for your words, for your insight, for your wisdom, for everything that you've given us today. It's been really a gift to have you both on here. So thank you from me, and also on behalf of Manderley, and also I hope it's not a sentiment saying on the part of everyone that's joined in today.
Thank
and
you
so
for
this,
having us here together. I love you with Matthew.
This is a real joy.
That too.
Mm-hmm. And so this will be, so it's been recorded, it will be available in the next couple of days on our website for anyone that would like to rewatch or share. And yeah, I guess I'll hand it over to Rachel to kind of sign us off for the afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I just echo exactly what Marissa and everyone seems to be saying in the chat. Thank you both so much. This has meant a lot to myself, and I'm sure everyone here. And yeah, like Marissa said, our recording will be up soon. And if anyone would like to get more involved in Manderley or know when the next event might happen, feel free to reach out to us. Or if you said you wanted to be on the listserv in the registration, we'll be reaching out to you as well. So. Thank you all again, and maybe one more round of applause or appreciation or what you can do for our readers. Thank you again so much.
Matthew has a book coming out. I'm just saying. Always giving me the glare.
I'm like a year and a half. You say it like it's next week, though.
But tell people the name of it.
Constellation Route.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Vievee.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure we'll all look out for it. Thank you both so much again. And everyone have a great and safe afternoon. Take care.
Bye. Love to everybody. Bye.